Welcome to the Sales Compensation Show, where we share the latest sales performance insights through in-depth discussion with experts. Season 3 of our show is your backstage pass to discovering how today's most successful sales and revenue ops teams support go-to-market strategy and improve sales performance. Plus, we'll explore what we can learn about incentives from different industries more broadly. Subscribe to hear how leaders are unlocking new growth, implementing the latest compensation trends, and their priorities for improving go-to-market performance. I'm your host, CEO of Form AI, Nabil Alzan. James, it's absolutely wonderful to have you on the show. Super excited to dive in.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I am very excited. I know we've worked together a lot in the past and super excited to be here.
It's interesting because you've been on our panels and we've obviously talked in the past, but I find this is a great avenue to really understand your career, your experience, and kind of the trajectory of how you got to here. And none of us, I feel like, at least I haven't met a single person yet that decided they want to be in RevOps or, in the world of sales compensation when they were young and just kind of entering the workforce. So we'd love to hear how you got to here.
Yes, 100%. I kind of stumbled into it. It's funny. I've taken a very unusual path, right? I was very fortunate, first to college in the family. I was an engineer and I ended up going to biz dev. And so I was building out new verticals at Siemens. I love presenting, being in front of customers. I love, that business side of things. I went and got my MBA at Harvard Business School with a focus on B2B sales and corporate strategy. And I talked to lots of CEOs and they said, James, in a P&L, stay close to the profit side. I took that to heart. I wanted to learn the intangibles you just don't learn in business school. I'm one of the rare folks at HBS that went into sales. I was on the very first consumption plan at Microsoft in the enterprise space selling Azure. So you can imagine this kid, never held quota before, selling in front of the world's largest customers, think, Tesla, Oracle.
These are the beginning of the massive cloud movement that was.
At the beginning, right? So I probably had a book of 30 accounts and 28 of them are new customers, $0 spend. And it was consumption, right? Which is way different than standard SaaS, selling contracts, right? So it was a lot of fun. I really do feel Microsoft's a great place, best in class when it comes to just that type of governance and just having that structure in how you sell. I'm a really curious guy. So as much as I enjoyed it, I knew I wanted to get in on the intellectual side, understand the plumbing that occurs behind the scenes. And so I made the pivot over in the sales strategy leadership at Meraki. Really great product market fit, $2 billion company growing, 20, 30+% CAGR, doubled, took them through COVID, had to reshift our verticals, working closely with sales leadership, being that kind of right hand for the global sales org, built out that org, helped grow the company, really understood kind of that growth engine. And it's not it's a team sport, right? It's not just about sales. It's about channel, partner, inside sales, right? Understanding how all that works together with marketing. And I really loved just learning how everything fits together. I then made the pivot over DocuSign at September 2021. It's the height of COVID. So you could imagine all the stocks were sky high. Sentiment was very frothy, I would say, in the space. So, I questioned my timing a little bit on that. But I built out their sales ops function from scratch, essentially. They did not understand enterprise selling, account-based marketing, customer success, sales pods. This was a classic SMB mid-market company that was trying to understand enterprise. So I brought that GTM transformation over to DocuSign, built out when you think about the capacity model, all the linearity, seasonality, all those kind of really hard skills. I call it vegetables. So that was a great experience, and still the curiosity kept egging me on. So now I'm over at Snowflake. I own our GTM planning compensation function over there. So it's been quite a journey. I like to think careers can go kind of deep and they can go wide. I would say for me, I've been intentionally been a little bit of both, right? So I've been staying kind of in the RevOps space, but I've been trying different function. And of course, having carried a bag of happy empathy, having a new board.
Which I think is a really important, I think it's a really important part of you need that empathy in the role of RevOps or in sales compensation. And I think you can get it two ways, by living it and breathing it firsthand, or you have to go out of your way if you come from the finance lens to get closer to that end customer that you're servicing and supporting. I think it goes a long way when you see leaders have that. So
100%. Look, there was a part of me that wanted to stay in sales, but a lot of me was also just making sure I had that experience. I just felt it was important to have carried the bag, right? To your point, right? It's something easier earlier than I would say later to kind of make that pivot. But I do not regret that at all.
Yeah. It's interesting looking again when you jumped in and when you transitioned to these roles. I mean, the crazy part is you've been in organizations as they've kind of been going through massive swings. You look at again the DocuSign swing of like everyone had to go digital, and then all of a sudden the market suddenly shifted in terms of everything is about enterprises spending less, finding ways to all of a sudden kind of reallocate resources. How do you think about that? So it's been very interesting, looking at your history of kind of the roles and the functions that you built out in these very agile or unexpected movements. Curious, yeah, would love to dig into like what you think about agility within the go-to-market function, how you think about building that up.
It's a great call out. Look, I will say I work close enough with the C-suite to know at the end of the day, we're all human, right? We make decisions based off the information that we ourselves know from our experiences and based off of like what people tell us on our teams. And so I'll be the first to say, join DocuSign kind of towards the height. I compare DocuSign a lot to like Zoom as far as just having this like meteoric growth during COVID. And so revenue essentially doubled in a year. Mean attainment was very high. You could imagine 140+% mean attainment, which is very unusual in a SaaS company. And so everyone was understandably, I would say, kind of drinking the Kool-Aid, right? Leadership was bullish, and it's how do we invest? How do we keep the good times coming? And as I mentioned, right, I was building out that enterprise SOPs organization, and you got a rep that has 30 accounts like I did, at Microsoft. And we're essentially like, hey, we want to keep growing. Well, in a standard capacity model, it's based off of ramp, and capacity and, number of headcount and quotas. So what do? Well, we doubled headcount. We grew quotas considerably. We said, hey, we want the good times to keep going. This is what we need. This is what the math sets. And, the warning lights came in, or I'm like, this doesn't make sense intuitively, right? Can you drive more productivity with half the accounts from 30 to 15? I'm running all this deep analysis looking at how many accounts the reps like touch where they're able to build pipe. The math isn't working out, right? And I think, the plan's the plan. And I think there's some concerns, right? How much can we actually grow this? Can we continue it? And hindsight's always 2020. But I'll say we had a rapid shift. We did not grow, continue growing 100% plus. And I think you have to quickly shift your thinking. So there's that shock moment where you think it's like just a flip of the switch, but it's literally took a couple quarters of missing the number of, thinking, okay, it's not going the way we thought it was going to go. How do we fix it? And, most companies do annual planning, and you do planning every 6 months if you're growing incredibly fast or if there's some type of disruption. And I think the latter was what happened in our case, where we had to reinspect and replan the business. And I think you do have to have that agility. And so one of the tools we built, I call it the poor man's LTV to CAC. I look at ACV divided by OTE of a rep. And essentially, it's a cheap way of looking at dollar in, dollar out. I looked at our verticals, I looked at our segments. And unfortunately, right, when you're trying to optimize the business, you're looking at like what verticals make sense, what segments make sense. I can compare an ASEAN SMB rep to a federal, North America rep, and I can understand kind of who's more efficient, right?
Yep.
And so we had to creatively build tools to help us measure the health of the business. And if we needed to make cuts and optimize the business, how would we do that? And I think those are some of the tools that we had to do to try to help right size the business.
Yeah, you touched on something very important, right? It's like in these two times, optimization or what was being optimized for was two separate things, right? Efficiency versus growth. And I think maybe just stepping back the high level of big picture, in your view, I guess, how do you think about comp plans and how they reflect the actual company's broader strategy?
Yeah, I think that's right on. I mean, look, I'll give you an example. At DocuSign and a lot of SaaS companies, when they're focused on hyper growth, contrast that with a slower growing company. I mean, even at, Cisco and other companies, right? A lot of times it's focused on like total contract value. It's about managing a book of business. There's more comp measures around retention, like reducing churn. It's based off the overall pie and making sure that pie stays, continues to grow at a slight rate. And, Microsoft with our, notorious for the enterprise agreement, it's this large, big structure for the contract to wrapper all the product lines within the, enterprise agreement. You tend not to see a lot of volatility. And it's funny, it mirrors the stock market, right? Like you're a big blue chip firm, you don't expect big swings. And then at the rep level, you kind of don't expect big swings either. If I'm a rep at Cisco, at Microsoft, at a huge firm like that, you're kind of more negotiating and making slight nuanced changes. They're not really dramatic shifts, right? You don't typically see like full churns or anything like that.
And your time horizon is way longer too. Like you're
Oh yeah.
yeah.
You're signing 3 to 5 year contracts, and very, very large contracts. And it's all, 100%. So I feel like that's kind of like the slower moving, right? When it's more about a defensive motion, you express that in compensation through retention, through those types of measures, total contract value. In hypergrowth, it's about incremental, right? It's like, look, you built your book of business to $1 million, rep. Good job. I don't care about the $1 million. I need you to get to 1.5. At a bigger company, they make quota you the 1.5. A hyper growth company says, look, I don't care about the 1 million. You need to give me 500K incremental, right?
Yeah,
And
that's all. Like someone else tackle this even potentially.
if I have a customer success or an account manager role that manages and is gold on retention, you need to focus on growth. And that's all we care about, right? And so that's where you get more of the winners and losers. And so you think about metrics like gross new monthly recurring revenue or incremental ARR or those types of measures. They're great ways of driving accountability to focus on growth.
Yep. Yep. 100%. I mean, you think about where a comp plan should and shouldn't play. I've heard you kind of like talk about this and in our prior conversation, but I think it's worth kind of reiterating because I think your take is very, very spot on in terms of like, what can you do with a comp plan versus what you shouldn't do with a comp plan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Look, people always, you ask any seller, right? No one's ever met a comp plan they liked. None seller's ever met a comp plan they liked. But I think the more accurate statement is it never met a quota and liked. Because I think people, number one, people construe the comp plan with the quota. They're separate things, right? And the second thing is the comp plan should express the strategy of the company. To your point earlier, right? There are companies that are in growth mode and companies that are in more mature, like retain mode. Those are different motions. Those are different GTM configurations, right? Focus on success and retention versus just driving volume, net new customer logos, acquisition motions, those types of things. And so I think it's really important, right, to reiterate that comp plans do not set the strategy of the company. They should express the strategy of the company, right? ELT, the CEO, CRO, there should be a perspective on what direction we're taking as a company. There might be a pursuit towards being a multi-product company. Companies around a billion, less than a billion, they may start to pursue that multi-product. All right, our organic products plateauing or whatever. We were doing bolt-on acquisition. We're building out new product lines, right? All right, great. The AI is a big focus right now. A lot of companies, Snowflake included, are focusing on an AI strategy. All right, how do we pivot comp plans to make sure sales is focused on AI, right? And so, again, like I think sales comp should express that. We reconfigure ourselves in order to, express that direction of ELT and get that done. So that's something like I always like call out when sometimes there's rough conversations with sales leaders and sellers, and it's like, look, guys, if the focus is on growth and we have a patch that's not growing, right? In total ACD lands, that rep may be 60%, but in incremental lands, that rep may be 15, 20%. And that was by design. That's a feature, not a bug, right? We want to have winners and people that don't succeed. And like, that's the only way you do it, right? You have to face those trade-offs as a leadership team.
100%. And what's interesting is I see this far too common where the executive team sets these goals and these objectives, but then there's such an adversity to the pain that's going to come from the organization shifting to that new mindset, right? Because incentives all of a sudden are tied to comp and there's this adverse reaction. So I've seen organizations stall out because they're afraid of that change, potentially because it's, I guess, how do you, if you think about that layer, you're translating these business requirements that you're getting from the ELT into how you tactically translate that to the rest of the sales organization. How do you overcome that, that difficulty or that pain that and pushback you're gonna get from the more middle level?
100%. Yeah, look, this is where, and people have told me this is like, James, I could tell you're in sales. Because to me, look, there's an old saying in enterprise sales, you win together, you lose together. Sometimes you also hear the term, all hands on the murder weapon. And to me, what that means is, look, I joined Snowflake about a year ago. The comp team did not have the best reputation. There wasn't a lot of credibility. There wasn't a lot of trust. And that's really not a common thing when I go into an organization and there's low trust across comp and sales. And so we had to understand like what happened, right? And why was there this disconnect? And what I realized is like, look, as much as because I've been in sales, I do not want a comp or planning team to be considered like in an ivory tower. We got to be out with the sellers, out in the field. We need to have the difficult conversations. And everyone has to feel ownership, right? When you're in sales, the best way you sell is when the customer reaches the conclusion that you like incepted it, you planted in their mind, and they reach the conclusion you wanted them to get to, and they feel like it was their idea. And so I take that to heart. And when I came in, the comp plans were not very popular. There were things that mechanically were not popular. And I see the whole picture. On one side, you have the commission scene. There's a budget on our cost of sale we have to align with. There's also the direction that ELT wants to align with. And then there's like what the sales leaders want, right? And sales leaders, they want attainment. They want to have to make money, right? And so I said, look, we got to do a reset here. And I did a little bit of a listening tour. I spent time in London, Boston, San Mateo. I spoke to SE leaders, sales leaders at different levels, second, third, fourth line sales leaders and individual contributor reps. And I'm like, look, tell me everything that just let me have it, right? I'm new. Tell me all the stuff that sucks about the comp plan. Just tell me. I won't be offended. I got it, all of the concerns. I synthesized them into a couple slides. I said, look, this is our comp tiger team. And so everyone's face is on a slide. I'm like, look, this is what we heard. We listened to you. This is what we heard. This is what we heard. It's not working. And I played it back. Okay, great, James. This is aligned with what we heard. So we're rolling out these new comp plans. I'm like kind of keeping this tiger team informed, right? Hey, like these are the things we're looking at. What do you think? I'm getting a little bit of informal feedback. This will work. This won't work. And I'm gently steering, management, ELT, as well as the field towards the direction that I think like makes the most sense for the work, what measures, et cetera. And so we launched this. Ton of work goes into it. We recast all of our measures from scratch to focus on that incremental, that kind of growth mindset. And we roll them out. And I'll never forget, because we actually, I gave this presentation less than 2 months ago. And we roll out the comp plans. And the very first slide, it's like a left to right slide. So on the left side, it's like, this is what we heard you say. This is what you guys had sucked about last year's comp plan. On the right side, here's how we're fixing it, right? So I played back all the concerns from sales leadership, everything people were screaming at me about. This is how we're fixing it, right? Are you going to like everything? No, right? The target, the number's number, right? But they felt heard. They felt listened to. They were part of the solution, right? And, if I had reached the same conclusion without them and there would have been zero trust, right? But the fact that I brought them in, I think that helped drive that credibility and drive that change management. To me, when people get nervous or people get stressed, some people like move very quickly. I'm the opposite. If there is a lot of change and a lot of things that are it's like very high risk motion, I slow down. I actually like make sure I have alignment. I make sure everyone's on the same page and no one's left behind when we get to the destination, because it's such a high risk event. A couple of vocal sales leaders can completely torpedo your credibility as a RevOps leader. So to me, like that is a very important lesson that I learned, is just making sure everyone's on the same page. You drive that bind from the get-go on that side.
Yeah, because it is the moment you lose trust. There's not only just the cost to you, and there's a massive cost to the organization, right? Every seller, every leader questions the incentives, the numbers on their dashboards, whatever it is that like now all of a sudden feed into a demotivation component, a time spent away from selling activities. And and so I think maybe stepping back, you said something very, very important, which is like you slow down when there's higher risk. I'm curious how you bridge that gap between what the executive team wants and how you translate it to, to a sales team that is really ultimately, I always find like it's looking for clarity, right? At the seller level, they're just looking to understand how am I going to make money, and as long as it aligns to the work effort put in. But it's always hard to translate what those business objectives are, which might be as simple as like 3 bullet points, like these are the top priorities, into what tactically needs to happen in the high risk move. But yeah, I'm curious, like when you say slowing down, maybe just elaborate a bit on that because I think this.
Yes, look, any big change, it's I forgot what they call it, but you have the signal, you like validate the signal, right? You triple check everything, and it's both directions. So from ELT, they want X, Y, and Z. Let's just, I'm making this up. Let's say, oh, we want reps to be able to make $1 million, or 300, 400% attainment. We want the top 10% reps to, completely, crush their total incentive, their TI. All right, like, this is what I heard, right? If we had this percent over here, okay, right? I go talk to the commissions and finance team. This is how much it's going to cost. When we get down to affordability, like ELT wants the moon and back. They want everything, right? You know, Look, ELT is a little bit distanced from an IC seller. They're not always going to add the same perspective like you called out, right? They just want to make money. ELT there might be a strategic direction. We're trying to reorient the organization.
Or they're thinking about like 3, 4 years away, and then the tactical right now, like yeah, that's the other part.
Yeah.
That's I find.
Okay, look, all of us want to make $1 million, right? Like, so we go to the finance commissions and like, all right, what's the affordability look like? All right, well, if we pay this spiff, we pay people this way, we retweak the rate tables. This is how much it's going to cost. Oh, okay, like we can afford this. Like we wanted, $200 worth of stuff for the sellers, but we only got $100, so we got to do some trade offs here, and that's where, okay, let's make sure we're aligned. ELT, how do we force rank what's most important? If we can't afford all these things, right? How do we compromise and how do we think through that? And I think that's where the intention's always good from ELT. Of course, we all want these great things, but our job is to operationalize it. And there's a lot of constraints that go behind it. Sometimes it's budgetary, sometimes there's systems limitations, right? I had an escalation come up this morning where, someone's against third line leaders against multiple territory profiles. And, oh, exactly. This stuff's like not configured properly to be able to handle it. Okay. Right. So we got to always figure out how we thread the needle on that. And I think that's where making sure on the same page, playing back what I heard. Hey, I heard from this, right? These are the things.
Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah, and like it's like in sales, right? In sales, you do a soft close. You make sure you reiterate what you heard. I heard this. I want to confirm. Hey, if if I deliver this for you, are we good? If I address your concern that you had, I do this. I kind of apply a similar mentality. All right, like this is what I'm hearing ELT say, but this is what I'm hearing sales say. If we reach this, would this be a sufficient way to solve it? Right? You're trying to thread the needle between the two parties, and I think and I'll also say this, every sales leader, there's different personas. You have folks that like, it's all about like, hey, I just care about myself and that I make a lot of money. You have second, third line sales leaders that are strategic, that like want to understand the direction of the company, and like they'll help cheerlead and help be supporters. And so I will also say this, not all sales voices are the same. There are some that are strategic and are really worth listening to, and they understand the numbers, they understand the direction, they try to drive the right behaviors, they try to put the company hat first. There's others who are, more opportunistic, and they're the folks that like break your rules of engagement. Every company has rules of engagement, and there's always that sales leader that like has figured out how to, hack it and like make money and like find all the exceptions. And then there's the folks that are like, trying to do the right thing. But I will also say like that's a really important ingredient is just making sure you have those kind of inside folks, you're kind of, people you're close with that you can kind of like test ideas with, right? So 100% where you enter, on that side.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, yeah, and I think that to establish that open line of communication, you have to like this goes back to the first point you mentioned around trust, right? If the team believes it's an adversarial relationship, it is extremely difficult to bridge that gap. It's like you think about if you have leaders and sales individuals that know that you're actually looking out for the best thing for the business and ultimately the best thing for them, then the sounding board that you're going to get is much more candid, right? Like you get that feedback of, hey, this is not going to work because it's way harder to sell this than that. So we're just going to stop selling this if you pay out this way. And
100%.
you need that candid feedback. Otherwise, it's very difficult to, you can have the empathy, but you're not in the day-to-day job now, right? And so to me, this is kind of the way that you bridge that gap is you were a practitioner before, and now how do you get close enough as a practitioner? You have to have those relationships with our front line.
I love that as a leader, the higher you are up, there's so much trust. Like you cannot micromanage every single person. If you're a second, third line RevOps leader, you cannot micromanage every single detail. There's just high trust required. And when you let smart people do their job and innovate and do their jobs well, you will scale more as a RevOps leader than trying to micromanage every single detail, right? And it's the same thing with building trust with sales leaders. Everyone has a brand, right? And that's what I was like alluding to a little bit before, right? That there are sales leaders that are strategic and I quickly suss them out. Like these are people I really like. I really respect their opinion. And if I'm rolling something out, I know that they're going to give me good, insightful information, on that side, right? And it goes two ways, right? If I build my brand as someone that's trustworthy and I say, hey, I'm going to get an answer for you tomorrow and I get an answer, right? If I'm reliable and I provide insight, right? Like that's the kind of thing that builds good reputation and brand over time and people come to, open up more, right? And so I will never turn down an opening. I've had new sales leaders come in and ask questions, sometimes really basic questions, and I will handhold them. I will take care of them because that is an investment worth making every single time. Every time I can spend some time with a sales leader, make them comfortable, right? That I call it the white glove. You always want to, I'm in a support role. I'm here. I tell sales leaders, I'm here to serve you. I'm here to help you guys out, right? I'm happy when you guys are making money. I want to make sure we put the best plan forward and we're all successful. Our stock, everything is successful. We do our best job, right? So help me help you, right? And when exceptions come up, when our, conflict comes up, like I'm here to help you and represent the sides the best, but we got to have that level of trust. If we don't, it is just, I'm telling you, it is night and day. RevOps is also incredibly unfun if you don't have basic trust with your.
Oh, it's a thankless role if you don't 100%.
When things are going well, no one's knocking on your door. But whenever things are not going well, you better believe you are.
Yeah. It's for the benefit of the business, for the benefit of like your day-to-day personal life. And I think one of the pros of being in sales comp and RevOps and these roles that are closer to the profit center, to your point, is you win. And the wins are wonderful, right? Like when that team hits the goals, and when the business achieves, like you're part of the machinery, the team that did this. And I think like, how do you best set yourself up? You have to have that type of relationship and collaboration. So, that's very much with the customer. I'm curious to get your perspective on like, how do you do that within your own team? It's like, how are you building trust within your own organization and that culture? Because it starts at the top, right? And then it cascades down.
100%, 100%. Look, every time you inherit an org, like, DocuSign, when you build out the org, that's one thing, right? When you're one of those first employees, you're kind of building that out. That's one journey. When you inherit a team, you're like the new kid learning the ropes, right? So it's good to have that learner's mindset. I'll tell you all the things I've learned coming into Snowflake, right? That applies to any company, right? You want to listen and you want to really understand the business as deeply as you can. And that means putting a pause on how things worked at your last company, right? I think there's that, there's always kind of the annoying, oh, like at my last company, it was XYZ kind of a thing. It's really important that you just listen deeply. Like, what are the needs of the team? What's happening? And are there some like quick adjustments that you can make to improve and show some results to the team. So there are situations where, maybe there was a capacity concern, maybe there wasn't clear engage like roles responsibilities set up across teams. I came in, I've kind of understood like what does everyone do, where are the concerns, where are we resourced, where are we not resourced, and then how can I add value and number one, like help provide some air cover for the team if there's concerns on pushing back to someone more senior or like digging into a problem, right? And, how do we rebuild trust across the teams? Because that was the other issue where I think teams sometimes will have reputations. And, to me, it is super important that those relationships are positive across the teams, right? There's always personalities. Everyone knows that, there were people in sales and ops that sometimes yell or swear. It's just like a little bit out there, right? And how do we navigate those emotions and those personalities and, make sure everyone's professional and like, trust is earned. It's not something by your title, it takes time. So it's earning that. It's, being consistent in your brand over time of like what you deliver and how you deliver it. And so my first 90 days at Snowflake, I assessed there were three main concerns that were raised. I repeated it back to the team and the leadership team. I said, look, these are the things I'm hearing from you guys. Is this correct? Am I off? And then within 9 months, I delivered on those three things, right? You said, this is what we're, here's how we're making investments and doing these things better. And I've played that back. And I think when you deliver on things and that you've promised, like, I think that's what helps build that credibility over time with teams.
Yeah. And then I think like thinking about the people that, that are reporting to you and how you're managing, are you cascading that down and that set of expectations to each of the team members that works for you? Is that how you're bringing that culture out to life?
100%. So we have the OKRs, right? We have OKRs. We set SLAs of like, what does best in class look like, right? RevOps, to your point, it is a thankless job. A lot of our job is just keeping the lights on, right? We're SOX compliance. We do attainment checks. We do all these things, splits, OTBs, not very fun things, but they're mandatory getting the like,
Yeah, it's needed for the business to execute. Someone has to support that 100%.
100%. So like the number one job for me was setting clear roles, responsibilities. So there's three teams. There's a systems team, planning team, and a comp team. And so the headcount was kind of all over the place. And so like, all right, we're going to have these firm leaders that own these pillars, right? We're going to have a leadership team meeting. We're going to set OKRs. I have a vision for what I would like to see and what I think best in class looks like. And how do we work together to achieve those, right? Comp has a role to play, planning and systems has a role to play. They'll all have to interlock with each other. And so you set that direction and you inspire that vision. And then you get out of the way, right? You provide support to the team, you provide clarity to the team. But I am not a fan of like micromanaging. I do not think, especially when you have good, talented leaders, I think you're hurting yourself and you're hurting the credibility of that leader when you try to like dive into that person's, director, that person's IC and try to, interfere too much, right? So I really do I like to spend time with skip levels and do one-on-ones and like check in. But to me, it's more about like the team building, the culture, setting that vision, but not micromanaging the work. Like that's like, you want to talk about trust. It's like, hey, I trust you to deliver. If we are missing on things, we can.
Yeah, inspection, like inspection and understanding what's happening so that you can call out, when things are going awry faster and course correction. But yeah,
100%, 100%.
I think it's such tactical advice for anyone building out a team and organization and thinking about kind of their connection to the rest of the organization. And we could spend like the next 2 hours talking about this, but just to kind of bring us back and wrap up the show, one segment that we like to run is effectively the Mythbuster segment, add a little fun to the world of RevOps and sales comp. And so we'd love to dive in and kind of hear your take, whether, it's a myth that needs to be busted or if it's truth. And so just, stepping back and thinking about consumption models and then not just being, big SaaS plans, but simply an extrapolation of ARR and how the expectations are set. So I'm curious to get your perspective on how you think about that.
Yeah. Look, it's so funny. I have seen a little bit of everything, right? Like starting at Cisco, we're selling boxes with a mandatory license attached. So it is, people giving crap sometimes. Oh, you sold boxes or whatever. Hey, we grew pretty quickly. We doubled the business in 3 years during COVID. It's like we did a pretty good job, but you know that was like a very like channel driven. You're working with Presidio, WWT, like the big channel VARs. It's about route to market. Very like, I don't want to say old guard, but it's been around for a long time sales model, right? Cisco's trying to figure out software right now, which is really tough because that channel component can be, it goes a boon and a curse. I come over to DocuSign, it's like, hey, I'm so excited. This is like 100% SaaS land. I'm going to learn a lot. Came in, as we discussed, kind of peak of COVID. And man, hypergrowth, company measures, everything is focused on that. Like consumption's kind of important, but we only care about bookings and growth bookings, right? And so that's all we care about. Book of business, how'd you grow to book of business, right? And that, by the way, drives very particular sales behaviors, which is potentially overselling customers, right? Or structuring deals, the art of the deal, right? To maximize, ARR or whatever from that side. And then I, come over to Snowflake. I'm like, wow, consumption. I did a little bit of that at Microsoft. This is really interesting. And holy Hannah, Nabil, it is incredibly complex. At DocuSign and a lot of SaaS companies, you can somewhat peanut butter spread quota, right? If I am a mid-market SMB rep, I can kind of peanut butter spread a million, 1.5 million ARR. And
There's still an impact, but you can get away with it.
yeah, there's like t-shirt sizes, right? Small, medium, large. You have a pretty consistent book, you have an upsell rate, whatever, and you go. Consumption. Imagine you're coming at stuff like 1,000+ sellers. Every individual has a custom, unique quota. You have a small army of data scientists that are obsessing over how the consumption is changing day to day. And at Microsoft, I remember I had my customers, I got daily updates on consumption, whatever. But like, imagine the complexity of, when it goes up, when it goes down from a single account patch, it adds so much complexity. So every company has like an exception committee or like a steer co, whatever, that deals with it. We are completely like, this is by far the most complex just because of that individualism. It's tough for planning comp because we have to make sure we're putting the right guardrails in. It's also really tough for the sales here because how do you assign quota down with a measure that's like, could change, right? And it's difficult to drive that attribution. And so a lot of companies, they look at use cases, they look at like, how do we tie workloads to new, consumption that can impact bookings, right? But there's always that push pull. There's the contracted bookings, which the bigger the bookings is, the more you try to oversell. Now the customer's going to want more concession, more discount. And then you have the focus on consumption, which is just a raw revenue number. So the more I focus on one, it's a little bit at the detriment to the other, right? So for example, if I have like 90% bookings, 10% consumption, I will likely have a sales team that oversells and drives higher discount. That higher discount hurts my consumption. Yeah. Conversely, 100% on consumption and no focus on bookings. Well, now I like potentially put free cash flow at risk because I'm not trying to, drive as much of that cash commit. And so there's always this like really interesting dynamic push pull that goes into consumption versus bookings. I find it so fascinating. And so I'll just tell you guys like, consumption, it is much more customized and it is much harder from a planning perspective. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, no, I agree with you on this one. It's not just a big SaaS plan. Like it's 100% when you have to revamp your quota setting exercise, your time. I mean, even something as simple as like, what's your quota setting period? You can have an annual plan, but you may have to reassess accounts on a quarterly basis. That's a very big cultural shift to get the sales team thinking about. It becomes a bigger business operation than just thinking about a comp plan or thinking about how you build your RevOps function. Like you need everyone at the table thinking like it's a consumption-based business
100%.
off right now.
I mean, look, on Feb 1, we have a perspective on what consumption will do according to the year. For the reps that start Feb 1, things can change. And for TBHs, the world can change dramatically. If you have a rep starting 4 months later, to your point, that quota actually maybe need to have shifted up or down between that time period.
100%.
It is super hard to peg down.
And especially with the volatility of markets, it requires an agility from like the first moment kind of mentality. I absolutely love that. And I think you've obviously talked about this before. We've covered some of the consumption-based models and some of the prior content and webinars we've had. So obviously for those that are interested in learning more, James has covered this, and I think there's lots of great resources there. But just to kind of wrap us up, I typically ask this question, two questions. One is, in the industry, who would you most like to take out for lunch and why? And I'd love to hear your take on that. Or
Yeah, and look, I will say I'm not like a huge, what do you call it, the key man kind of, idolizing. Overall, I've realized like the more I progress in my career, it's more about relationships than anything, right? It's like you built a level of competency and brand and like kind of people know what you're good at, where you spike from a skills perspective. It's more about relationship. I think it's really important. I am always like sharpening the saw. So I always go to trade events. I'm always meeting new people. I also stay close to my friends that are in not only in industry and RevOps, but also in like private equity and venture capital. And so I am always, at least once a week, I'll try to have lunch, with a colleague or a friend from that arena. I just like to keep my ear to the ground. I like to understand what's happening in the industry, what's happening in the RevOps area. I'm just a curious guy. So it's maybe not a good answer, but I would just say overall, I like to kind of stay close to, those fields of, on that side. Is it? So kind
no, I love it. I mean, it is the right approach. I mean, the world is way smaller than you think, and especially as you kind of get further and further along in your career, right? And having that connectivity, absolutely. Okay, well, so to wrap us up, is there a book, a podcast, that, a resource that's shaped how you lead, kind of operate today?
Yeah, there's a book. I'm super old school, man. And there's this book. It's called The Servant Leader by James C. Hunter. It's this like old book I read in college. And it's really, I'm an odd person that I took a minor in sales and a minor in leadership in undergrad. And I could not recommend more of that book. It's just about like how you show up as a leader, how you drive change as a leader and stand up for your team. I think that would be one book I would strongly recommend.
I love that. I mean, yeah, I think at the end of the day, it is a grueling job. It's difficult. It's not easy, and you have to bring a whole organization around doing some very difficult things. So, no, I love that. It's a good choice. But yeah, this was an absolutely wonderful episode. I really enjoyed the conversation, and thank you again for coming on.
As always, it's a pleasure, Emil. Thank you so much for having me.
The Sales Compensation Show is brought to you by Forma AI, the sales performance management platform that fully integrates sales planning with rapid, scalable incentive compensation management. Our data platform brings together how you can plan and manage the entire lifecycle of territories, quotas, and incentives. With global customers like Autodesk, Stryker, and Hootsuite, we enable go-to-market teams to plan and deploy even the most complex SPM strategies at speed, taking you from idea to execution instantly. To learn more about Forma AI, visit our website at forma.ai. Hit the subscribe button and find more episodes of the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Thanks for tuning in.